So, hey, this is Shaun with the Atlanta Tennis Podcast, powered by Go Tennis. Check out our calendar of Metro Atlanta tennis events at letsgotennis.com. Today, we are talking with Dr. Patrick Cohn of Mental Training for Peak Performance, and he is helping us with our mental focus and the mental training and the specific things we need to do to take the greatness that we have, and it's just greatness, isn't it? The greatness that we have on the practice court and bring it out into the matches. And this is not even sports specific. This is anything that's competitive. We can take that. By we, I now include myself in whatever Dr. Cohn can do, evidently. We, meaning Dr. Cohn, can help us take that to the next level. Today's question is, for Dr. Cohn specifically, and you've got a lot of experience in this area, I'm looking for a few of the top challenges, kind of the most commonly faced challenges that you see in tennis players specifically. I'm sure their challenges are a little bit different here and there between tennis and golf and baseball and dog trial competitions, right? Everything's a little bit different between sports. But in this case, tennis specific, can you walk us through a few of those top challenges and how we deal with them?
Sure. If you think about the nature of the game, Shaun, we see a lot of perfectionists. I mean, that's our main clientele. So we see a lot of perfectionist tennis players. And what that basically means is they struggle with letting go of the last point, letting go of the last game, and getting to the next point or the next game. As you know, momentum is absolutely huge, really in any sport, but it's massive. You've been watching, obviously, any of the Australian Open. You see a player will drop the first set, but then they'll come back and win the next set, or vice versa. That's a momentum thing. And often momentum is about confidence. And I call it confidence squared when you have a lot of momentum. So you see players will kind of go off the rails a little bit. And what happens is they lose that momentum and they start missing, and then they start getting upset, and then getting upset obviously leads to more missing. And so that's a big, obviously, challenge in the world of tennis. But a lot of it starts with this notion of the perfectionist and wanting to hit perfect looking shots and always hitting the target and never hitting the net or hitting it long. And then getting, that player will get upset when they're not performing to their own expectations. So that's a big part. That's the underlying challenge that we see with tennis players. But certainly from point to point and being able to let go of any negativity or any judgment about that last point.
And that's judging that last point. You talked about the perfectionist of the character trait within the athlete. And sometimes that's a necessary evil, so to speak. Not that it's evil, but to use that phrase, it's a necessary piece of that almost that comes across as an arrogance or whatever it is that says, no, I can do this perfectly. And we want that in training. That's sometimes how that athlete gets to where they are. But then it becomes an issue when we're playing tennis. I did watch some of the Australian Open, which talks, it sends me to talk about the Medvedev, the Daniil Medvedev that gets up 2 sets and 5-2 and then kind of takes his foot off the gas. Is that kind of a similar thing to what we're looking at that can just all of a sudden we lose focus?
Well, it's lose focus, it's get complacent, it's start going through the motions, and then allowing your opponent in the match by giving your opponent momentum. So I think that's a different thing than but you're absolutely right about the perfectionism. I mean, if you look at, Serena Williams, Iga Swiatek, Nadal, I mean, they're all perfectionists in terms of their training and their approach to the game. But then it can rear its head on the match court, certainly, when you're not performing up to your expectations.
And if you think you're going to be perfect, where most of us are rarely that way, if ever, we look at some of the players on tour and we say, okay, well, they're perfect compared to us, and we're not even close to that. But what I often remind people is we all play at our own level. And in that level is where we need to compare ourselves. Am I a little bit better than I was yesterday, rather than trying to compare myself to the professionals that we see on television? And we're often not perfectionists, but maybe we are as athletes. maybe former athletes or coaches or budding athletes, young athletes coming out to say, okay, well, I've got this perfectionism that's gonna bug me when I miss. It really comes down to that number one thing that says, can I let that last point go, or that last shot, or that last set even, or those last two sets, and get started again and get focused? How do I do that though? That seems difficult, to say the least.
Well, it's certainly it's a lot easier said than done, but basically it's about not judging what just happened in the past, and that's obviously hard to do, is to not judge, but be able to get to that next point. Having a between point routine can help with that, but there's more to it than that, because you have to know your own triggers. What's going to trigger you to get upset? That's the start. Is it missing a ball in the net? Is it missing a routine sitter in the center of the court? Is it hitting the ball long? Is it losing when you're up 40-love, losing the game? Like, so we try to investigate what are the top triggers for that particular player, and then we talk about the underlying expectation and the belief, their interpretation of why it's so awful. And once we have the interpretation of why it's so awful, then for each and every trigger, we're going to alter that to a new reaction and give them a new reaction that they can practice in practice and on the match court as well. So it gets a little technical or a little complex. There's steps to being able to let go of that last point, let go of the frustration you're feeling, the expectation you have about how you should be playing. So there's several components to that, but ultimately for your audience, if you can just not judge how that shot felt, how that shot looked, where that shot ended up, and just get to the next point, that's the easiest way.
And that sounds robotic. That sounds like you're going to tell me to not be an emotional being and not respond. I mean, most tennis players are going to get frustrated when they miss. So to look at a young Roger Federer who was kind of a hothead and struggled to get his emotions under control, or a very angry Rublev, who's a current player now that just seems always upset when anything goes wrong. I can only imagine someone like us that's just out there playing on a Saturday morning, trying to figure out why this affects me so negatively. And I want
It's
to
the same.
key in.
It's the
I
same.
agree that it's the same. And
For
that's where I always talk
3.5, 3.0, 3.5,
yeah.
4.0, 4.5. We've worked with all levels of players and that have the same challenges, right? So they can be perfectionists too out there.
And in that case, I really like what you said about giving them a new reaction. It makes me think of when we train. I'm raising my child now, my 1-year-old, and something happens and he reacts. Now he's really young to be able to adjust his reaction to any setting. But the sooner we get that in and we say, okay, well, this happens, it was bad, how do we react? How long are you going to be upset about a thing? And maybe it isn't, this is something I've worked with in my life a lot, about flipping a switch and just saying, oh, no, it's fine. We can't all immediately just flip that switch. Do you find that sometimes it's just moving the needle or turning the dial and saying, okay, be upset about it less than you were last time? Is that helpful? Or we try to get the switch flipped?
Well, you could do the 10-second rule. The 10-second rule is
Ooh, what's that?
basically it's just you can think about it for 10 seconds, but then you got to let it go and you got to get to the next point.
Then you have to move on. Okay.
That's what you mean by being a little bit better. But
yeah.
Yeah, so give yourself 10 seconds to assess and think about what you need to do going forward, and then try to move on. That's basically the 10-second rule. But it's really everybody. It's really each individual tennis player knowing what their push buttons are, knowing what those triggers are, and knowing why those triggers, why they get triggered by those triggers, and then creating a new reaction for them. For example, if I double fault, and let's say that's my trigger, is double faulting out there, and I get all upset, well, then the question is, what's so awful about me double faulting? Then I might say, well, I practice my serve a lot, I work on my serve quite a bit, and I should never double fault. So the expectation behind it is is I shouldn't double fault. I just need to start the point. I just need to get the ball in. I should never do that. Notice the terminology. It's all often about absolute thinking. So given
Never.
that, then I've got to come up with a new reaction that's more acceptable. And that more acceptable reaction is even the pros double fault. I'm okay. I've got another point here. Move on. It's already in the past. I can't get it back. So that's the type of new reaction that we like to work on with tennis players.
Oh, and I just want to go deeper into that. Maybe we need that is its own subject because
Maybe we
that
need to
makes
talk about your triggers.
I know I'm taking this personally, aren't I? I'm rarely upset when I double fault. I don't double fault a lot. It's not part of my game to double fault a lot because I have a fairly safe serve. But when I do, I'm always reminding myself that I'm going for something or that my plan was good. To be able to come out of a point, and as a coach, we have to say it a lot, to where we say, no, we don't, good try is kind of childish, but no, you did the right thing. That you got what you were looking for, or whatever those phrases were that
Well,
said,
you're focusing on the
right
attempt.
idea.
Yes. We call it the attempt. Was it a good attempt? Did you swing through? Did you swing freely and you didn't steer it and guide it? That's the attempt, right? Did you have a good picture in your mind of what you wanted to do with the shot or the serve? Yeah. So if you have a good attempt, we also call it having a quality at bat, in the baseball world, then that's a good thing. And then, but you default to that, which is great. You default to, well, good plan, good idea, and I made a good swing. It just didn't work out. So that's great.
Well, that took me a long time to get there, and it might only be
Yeah.
because I'm a coach now that it helps me understand. I say this to them, I should be able to do it myself. We should be able to practice what we preach, so to speak. But as a player, I don't know that I was necessarily that way. And I wonder if I can find that way to take that specific reaction. And I'd like to focus on that because whatever the issues are, this boils us down to kind of the thing that I want to ask you today is whatever our triggers are, whatever those top issues I have as a player, that our listeners have as a player, whatever those are, how do I move that needle a little bit? Is it 10 seconds? Do I need a little bit longer right now because I'm just getting started? Maybe I can get to the point that once I get to the towel, then my time's up. Then eventually I can just flip the switch. Whatever, I need to be able to shut it off quicker and quicker and quicker. Or do you think there should be some grieving time? Is that okay?
Not necessarily, Shaun, because the whole goal is to get to the next point or the next game unencumbered by the last point. You're not frustrated, you're not dwelling on it, you're not losing confidence in any way. So as long as it happens between point anytime. But I love your association with by the time I get to my towel, or maybe by the time I turn around and face the court. So being able to associate it with a specific part of your routine would be helpful, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's a way that any player looking to work on that mental toughness of their top challenge. And maybe the things that you see on a daily basis isn't anything that I worry about because I have a less common top challenge. But in my case, I look at these things and I think, okay, how quickly can I recover from that last point seems to be one of the biggest issues here, and I could probably zoom out and that could cover a lot more of the other challenges, maybe even at least a few of them, of if I can fix this one thing, it kind of filters down to help other things.
Well, absolutely, because what happens is where we started is it can snowball in a negative momentum. In other words, getting frustrated causes you to rush. And then when you're rushing, you're not making good decisions. And then you're also overhitting if you're playing the next point frustrated. So that will just snowball downward for a lot of players.
So it makes it worse.
Yes.
Okay. So in that case, making it worse, we figured out what makes it worse. My question to you today, to wrap it up and say, okay, you know what, if I can take one thing out of this, what is one thing that can help me stem the tide, so to speak? If it's not my idea of going to the towel or Sharapova turning around, checking her strings, whatever it is to wash off that last point, what do you have for me?
Well, remind yourself not to judge the last point because it's in the past. And then turn your back to the court, go towel off, work, work, focus on your strings, whatever you like to do in your routine. Once you turn around, you're unencumbered. Now you're 100% committed to the next point when you turn around to face the court. The court.
So find the way, whatever it is for you, because that's the key here, is everybody's got different triggers. Everybody's got different things. Makes me think of what Pumbaa say in The Lion King. He's like, you got to leave your behind in the past. And basically just saying, you know what? It's over, it's done, but that's probably not easy for a lot of people. We're emotional beings, and that's got to be extraordinarily difficult. Dr. Cohen, as always, thank you so much. We'll see you again next week.
All right.
Take care.